My name is Mark Zawacki. I'm founder and managing partner of Milestone Group, and we've been asked to moderate this session. We're a 25-person strategy and operations consulting firm based here in downtown Palo Alto. 25 professionals. We work with Microsoft and SAP and Oracle and tons of startups, about 170 clients in the last 7 years across technology, media, and telco. And monetizing technology, I guess, is what it's all about, although we wouldn't be in business.
Thanks so much for coming to the panel today. Hopefully we'll be able to entertain you and answer any questions that you might have about this very exciting topic. I'm Kelly Cutler. My company is Marcel Media, and we are a Chicago-based interactive advisory firm. And what that means is essentially we go out and work with our clients on how to best establish an online marketing presence. And a lot of the tactics that we are using revolve around Web 2.0 and social networking and social media marketing and search engine optimization and all of the different buzzwords that everyone's talking about. So I think this is a really interesting time in our industry. A little bit about my background. I started my career in 1997 when the internet was a pretty exciting new thing at a company called Classified Ventures, which is owned by the Tribune Company and several other media companies. And I was working with companies like Cars.com and Apartments.com to go out to newspaper advertisers and try to get them to advertise on this cool new thing called the web. And for the first time ever, they could do things like virtual tours and online photos, and you could receive a lead online via email and things like that. It was pretty exciting back then. And from there, I worked at a couple other internet companies, including one you may have heard of, which is AOL, Time Warner. I was there for several years and then decided that what people really wanted to do was to work on search engine results, and they wanted to see themselves at the top of search pages on Google. That was in 2003. That's when I started my company. And luckily, at that time, when I took that risk, I think I was onto something. So search engine marketing's grown quite a bit since then, and we're embracing all types of new opportunities with regards to the internet, and look forward to hearing some of your questions, and hopefully we can shed some light on the things that you're most interested in today.
I was here, there was an investment management class, and I think the subject of the case was, is Google undervalued or overvalued? And this was like several years ago, and I was brought in as the guy who had formerly been at Yahoo. I was brought in as a venture capitalist to give my astute opinion around whether Yahoo was undervalued or overvalued as part of the class discussion. And there was actually, when I came walking in, there was a guy who was sitting right where Drew is. His name was Lance, and he was just coincidentally was the younger brother of one of my best friends, and he happened to be a student here at Stanford Business School. And so I had the immense joy of cold calling him to ask him a question, which then everyone booed me because I had gone to Harvard Business School, not Stanford, and they said it was very like Harvard to do that. So I'm going to be on my best behavior and try to be as friendly as possible so I can hopefully change some of those perceptions. So my background, I work at Greylock. I'm a partner. I invest in consumer technology companies. We have 18 companies that are in our portfolio that are consumer internet investments. There was a first wave of investments for Greylock that were more infrastructure-oriented investments around the internet. So we invested in DoubleClick, Mediametrics, Red Hat, and businesses like that. More recently, in the last kind of 3 or 4 years, some of the bigger companies that Greylock's invested in are Facebook, LinkedIn, Dig, and a whole bunch of companies that you probably haven't heard of yet, but hopefully someday you will. So before Greylock, I was at Yahoo, and I led a couple of different businesses there. That were some of the bigger advertising and commerce businesses for the company. And before that, I was an entrepreneur, and I worked in 3 startups that were all consumer startups, which is where my gray hair mostly comes from.
Wish I had hair.
Plus, we have a 6-week-old child at home, and so I'm getting more gray hair by the day. So that's me.
Great.
My name's Ted Burns. I'm the VP of Product and Marketing for 4Info, which is a mobile search and advertising company. We're based out of San Mateo. We're about 60 people right now. We were founded in 2005 and have sort of grown the company from, I started when it was about 5 people. Zaw, who is the CEO, who's too sick to come today, but he literally started out in his living room with his roommate, trying to figure out what they were going to do with some mobile stuff. So My background is I come from, I started out in 1995 writing website reviews for business magazines. And that led to a job with AOL in 1996, and I was there from 96 to 2003. I ran product management and content programming for AOL Canada during that time, so it was sort of like creating a lot of the stuff like quotes and portfolios for the Canadian audience, and also making sure that the welcome screen has its share of Britney photos kind of on a 24/7 basis. So, after that, after I moved out here, got a job with Yahoo and spent a year and a half working in the mobile group with Yahoo, which led me to 4info, who was really focused on trying to build up and monetize an SMS search engine. And we really spent a lot of time sort of building out the product, taking the search engine across several different mobile platforms, which included WAP, client version, J2ME, Brew version, and then further SMS services. And once we kind of got that done, we got a strategic investment from Gannett, which led to sort of promotion in USA Today, which consequently led to lots of users and attempts by us to try and monetize it. So we actually went through multiple different sort of ways to try and monetize this, including premium services, mobile content, paid mobile content, and finally settled on advertising as a successful business model. So now we've monetized our own content and partner publisher content, and have spent most of the time sort of at this point now trying to build our sales team to sort of sell all of the inventory that we've created.
Great. Hey, I want to thank Justin James Bauer, who's helped put these questions together. We've got plenty of questions that are going to certainly more questions than time. But I also want to ask the audience to start thinking of questions and treat this as a conversation, not a panel presentation. I'm going to kick off a couple, but Justin, keep an eye on people raising their hands so we can get audience input here. I'm going to start with a question around Web 2.0, and we're not going to debate that term. That's another panel. But how has this next era of internet really changed the startup game, specifically with respect to funding, time to market, and ultimately getting the money back out? I'm going to start with James and ask the others two to feed on that question. So how has Web 2.0 changed the startup game, specifically with respect to funding, time to market, and monetization? So,
Well, I think the thing that said a lot that I'll repeat briefly, but then maybe move on to some other comments on the question. I think a lot of people have made mention of the fact that the cost to start a business, and potentially scale a business, are materially lower than they have been in the past, right? In terms of software and infrastructure and potentially distribution models and advertising models, monetizing through Google AdSense or ad networks. And so I think that one thing I think you read a lot about is that the cost to start businesses and potentially scale businesses is lower than it's been in the past, and it has a material impact on the landscape. I think that there's something to that, certainly. At the same time, the number of businesses that actually are able to get sort of escape velocity and become really meaningful businesses is still, it's much more limited than that. And so I think in the market right now, there's sort of this weird combination of there's some very interesting underlying sort of secular trends that I'm continuing to be very, very bullish around in terms of just if you look at broadband and globalization and mobile and social media. There's some fundamental trends that I think are very powerful. Cyclically, we're in a kind of a little bit of a weird time right now. So given that there is a lot of funding, a lot of investors, and I think a limited number of sort of big ideas and big opportunities. And so I think we're in this very interesting time where the fundamental trends underlying the consumer internet are powerful and positive, and I think reason to be bullish about them. But sort of the funding dynamics and other dynamics in the market, I think, give reason to be, I think, a little more cautious, just cyclically.
I want to ask, Ted, I got a follow-on question for you, and specifically in 4info and time to market. I mean, how did you guys find this, this new era in the last couple of years building out your business, and how did that affect, the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, I think there's a misperception that a startup will sort of move on a dime, right? So we working with sort of a lot of partners, I think there's usually a big expectation that we'll be able to sort of do something immediately. And I think there's a big, there's the delta between quality and doing something quickly, right? So I think, our focus has really been on building a quality product, which has at times pissed off various partners. So I think there's been a lot of pressure that, just because you're sort of in that Web 2.0 startup, you're going to do it really fast, right? And I think, you'll see a lot of the folks are sort of I think there's more people now who are taking their time doing a quality product. It's not just get thrown up. It's not like, when we were at AOL or Yahoo, like around 2000, 2001, we'd be getting called for recruiters for businesses where you're like, what the hell is that? You just had no idea what it was. So.
And Kelly, add to that, what do you see in the marketplace right now with these Web 2.0 companies? And I suspect your business is consuming a lot. It's right there knocking on your door saying, how do you take us to market, and with the big firms you work with?
Yeah, quite a bit. I'm getting a lot of phone calls these days. There are a lot of companies out there that are trying to come to market as quickly as possible. And I think it's somewhat of a crowded marketplace. Like you said, there's not as many big ideas, but there are a lot of companies that are sort of trying to feed off of what has worked with some of the successful businesses that have kind of made it. And I think that it's challenging for somebody like me to weed through what's out there and and figure it out. We look to our partners quite a bit, for their recommendations and the things that they're using and that they're finding are successful. And we go to companies that we are comfortable with, like Google, and we look at what they're doing. And sometimes they offer things that that smaller companies don't offer, and sometimes vice versa. But we really do like to try different things for our clients. That's a big part of our kind of strategic advantage in the marketplace, is that most of our clients don't have time to look at all the different tools and things that are available in the new kind of Web 2.0 world. So we do try to bring them new ideas, but there's certainly a lot to wade through in that process.
All three of you have very, very strong online ad backgrounds. Two of you at AOL, two of you at Yahoo. What are some more creative ways startups are making money other than advertising? Do all roads lead back to Google, or are there other ways people are going to make money? All three of you. It's a question for each of you. We start with Ted again.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's like the most interesting stuff out there has been free. I mean, internet is really the advent of free content, right? So, I mean, it kind of comes back to how are you going to monetize that? And I think the premium services and subscription models, that's old, right? That is the telcos. That's the cable guys. We for Info, we were always trying to figure out how we could keep our core services free, and that being that we wanted to make it easy for people to get mobile content, and we wanted it to be free. How are we going to do that? So we tested out, all these kind of premium options that would help, but it just nothing really kind of took. So I think there's this aspect of it's like people expect free at this point, right? So I don't know that. Outside of people kind of go back to a subscription model or something like that, there's a really clever way.
But the real estate on a phone isn't a lot. How do you put and then you got to put advertising on there. How does that all work?
But you look at one of my ads, it's 25% of these real estate. So I take up anyway. That's part of our pitch, So, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, right? Trying to kind of like protect the user experience and then monetize it, right? Which is where we actually spent a lot of time figuring out what the right user experience is for an advertisement. We didn't even go into advertising until we had tested it out and said, like, is this something people are going to accept? And what we found is like the number one piece of information we found is that people were willing to trade free, ads for free, right? I mean, it was just like users accepted that, and I think that had been instilled from them on the internet side. Yahoo is really the progenitor of trading free for an ad.
So
James.
Across some of the companies that we work with, there are a few models that are sort of, I'd say, outside of standard ad models. One model that's pretty fascinating is just digital goods and virtual items. So it's relevant to Facebook. It's also relevant to there's a younger company we have that's based in San Francisco called Congregate, which is it's started by a guy out of Electronic Arts, and it's sort of a community around casual games. And on Congregate, the way it works, they have a couple million people a month who are on Congregate, but there are a couple 100,000 who are like totally addicted, ravenous users of the site who compete to earn badges and achievements so they can put on their profile. And it takes literally, like, it would take me probably a full work week to get one badge or achievement, literally on these games. And the average person who has a badge or an achievement has 25 of them. So and there's several 100,000 people who are like this. And so what they're about to introduce to this group of people who are sort of ravenous, about the site, around the site, is the ability to, accessorize yourself, kind of your presence in some way on your profile, the ability to get special powers around certain games, and you pay for that, $5, $10. It's a model that a company called Cyworld and I think other guys who are in the sort of virtual world community space and kid space, Habbo and Gaia and others have all, I think, been building, which I think is pretty fascinating and potentially insanely high margin, right? If you charge someone $10 for that spear to have in a game, it doesn't cost you a lot to deliver that. You're not manufacturing the spear, right? So that's one model. The second model, is I do think that with some services there's an opportunity to get a small percentage of people to pay a fair amount. So LinkedIn, for example, a meaningful percentage of LinkedIn's revenue comes from people who subscribe to have the right to send messages to people who they're not directly connected to.
And that's Zing's model as well, if they're a competitor of LinkedIn.
Yeah, so even though it's a relatively small percentage of the users, it actually adds up to a material amount of revenue for them. So there's that model. And then the final one is I think there are some very interesting, more integrated models around advertising that are sort of beyond banners or contextual ads. We have a company called Revision 3 that's in the niche video space, who's started by a guy out of Dig. And what they basically do is they point a camera at a couple guys who sit on a couch, and it's sort of Wayne's World-ish, truly, but who just riff on a particular subject, and then they get 1 million people to watch this thing, and they do this dozens of different shows. And then they get advertisers who are interested in integrating their message into a more authentic kind of form of media to essentially sponsor, the show. And so Kevin Rose, who runs Dig, is the host of one of the shows, and he'll start out and say, I'm drinking Molson or whatever, and he'll talk about Molson a little bit, and they'll pay, and it'll be clear it's an ad. Yeah, but they'll pay $25,000 or each month or whatever to have him do that. And so I think that it sort of harkens back to the days of the soap opera, right? Which was soap opera programming was called that because it was sponsored by the soap companies, right? It's sort of that same idea. Howard Stern does that, right? Hopefully, I don't listen a lot to Howard Stern, but I did. I would hear him. Speak about specific products in an integrated way. So those would be the three that I've seen. Would basically be sort of virtual item, sort of integrated advertising, or subscriptions to a small percentage of the user base.
Great. And Kelly?
Yeah, I would agree. I think I've seen all three of those as well. I think the first one sort of seems somewhat challenging at this point, but maybe that's a good play for the future, because I do think people will be willing over time to put more time and resources and potentially money into building out who they are online in these social networks and adding special powers and sending gifts. And you can't send real flowers anymore. You send a $2 virtual flower bouquet on your Facebook profile. So things like that I think are coming. I think some kind of cool things that Google's doing that are of interest probably to other companies as well. They're offering different types of advertising models, kind of similar to what you're talking about, but the ability to sponsor widgets that are made or gadgets that are made through Google, which people can then place on their desktop and reference, on their own time. That's sort of a neat advertising model for people who are looking for new opportunities. A lot of advertisers are very familiar with the sponsoring the news segment on the 6 o'clock news, or sponsoring weather or traffic or NPR or things like that. So I think the internet is sort of moving in a direction where that's going to be available. And also looking more at product placement types of integrated campaigns, and we're seeing that a lot more. YouTube is starting to offer some pretty intriguing advertising opportunities that we haven't seen in the past, and I think consumers are a little bit more willing to participate in advertising when it's done in that sort of on-demand capacity, when they know that if they stand for a 10-second ad on YouTube, they get to watch a half-hour television episode with no interruptions. I think they're willing to make that compromise. So, I think advertising is kind of evolving as all of these new technologies are available. And I think television and radio are following, and they're gonna have to keep up, because Google is now offering advertising that has the same targeting capabilities that their online advertising offers through traditional forms, which in the past people have kind of agreed that, well, I'll run some radio spots, I don't really know what happens, but hopefully my phone will start ringing. That's not happening anymore. At this point, Google's out there saying, well, we'll tell you exactly at what moment they changed the station, we'll tell you how long they were engaged for, we'll tell you if they called within a certain amount of time. They have this new deal now with the Dish Network, and Google's offering TV advertising, and it has all kinds of amazing tracking capabilities that we've never seen in the past through television. And they only charge you when people are totally engaged with your ad, which is totally different than television in the past, where you don't know if they're TiVoing right through it, and you don't know if they're, even in the room at that point. And you're buying on this big, broad sort of, scope. So I think it's come a long way. I think advertising is moving in the right direction, and they're really doing a lot to target it effectively.
Great. We have a question over here.
Yeah, I just want to challenge you a little bit on that. If you do a pre-roll ad on YouTube, you can track someone's clicks and watching it, but I'm still waiting for Web3 where I can actually track your eyeballs and make sure you're watching it. Isn't that just an incremental step from playing ads on TV, traditional network television? If I get to watch the 30-minute sitcom, but I got to watch 8 minutes of commercial when I'm watching it, it's just an incremental step, right? There's still no way to make sure people are actually watching that pre-roll.
Well, YouTube, I think, is doing a couple things with regards to that. The first thing is I think that people are more willing to watch one ad at the very beginning that's shorter in duration, and know that then for the rest of the television show they won't be interrupted. I think that's different than what we're used to with traditional television. And the second thing is YouTube is also doing something where you can have your logo at the bottom the entire time that the video is running, and you don't have that pre-roll ad.
Stealing space.
So it's right. It's branding, and it's not as. And they're looking at different creative opportunities, and the ability to click on the ad, and the ability for the ad to give a message, and things like that are coming in the future. So it's certainly not perfect, but I think it is better.
We got a question back here, and then you're next.
I was curious, what percentage of revenues for LinkedIn come from subscriptions versus advertising? Which kind of grows faster? And what percentage of subscribers, of users actually subscribe?
They are good questions. I'm going to have to be a little vague on it because it's a private company, and I think if they wouldn't want me to get into a lot of details about their financials. Hopefully someday it'll be public and they'll report that. I can tell you at a high level though that their revenue is fairly well distributed, I would say, across three segments, which is advertising. I mean, they're basically reaching a business, sort of a Wall Street Journal, Business Week kind of demographic, and they sell that to mostly business-oriented marketers. Subscriptions, which we talked about, which is a small percentage of the user base, but it's a meaningful part of the revenue. And then fees from recruiters who want to access the database, right? So it's spread across those three. I can't give you the exact breakdown, but it's those three. And then again, the subscriber base it's a small percentage of the overall base, but it's a meaningful percentage of the revenue.
Great. Question here.
Are affiliate programs on the rise, going away, where you get a percentage of the proceeds from causing an action to occur on another site?
Well, we, ForInfo relies pretty heavily on a publisher network where we share revenue with companies like eBite and NBC on advertising we run across their system. So I think at least in the mobile space, it's just starting. It's basically just getting started. Folks are just starting to mobilize their content. So you'll see companies like AdMob, but they're a complete publisher network. Most of the advertising companies, with the exception of us, are all based on sort of an affiliate model in terms of revenue sharing across with advertising. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. We use ad networks quite a bit, especially the highly targeted ones, where you can, really choose the sites that you want to use to advertise with. I think that's an important part of this whole conversation, definitely.
Is there a question back here?
So actually, kind of putting on that, instead of monetizing, where would you spend your money to get those eyeballs or those clicks? That's one. And secondly, for the people who have gone through the hockey stick, is the companies that go through the hockey stick, is there a particular characteristic that happens at that location that makes them all of a sudden take off?
Sorry, I can take that first. All right. So the first part of your question was, give it to me again, was...
Well, I know this is industry dependent, but where would you spend your ad dollar?
Got it. Okay. Well, so I think that there are a couple of different distribution models in general that work. I mean, if I were to kind of like abstract it out. There's a model that's driven off of essentially driving a lot of traffic through algorithmic search, right? So people are searching and finding you mostly through Google. And that's a model that's predicated on either having a ton of pages indexed, right, in search engines, or having a ton of links in from high-value kind of sites into your website, right, or some combination of that. So if you were to look at, for example, Yelp, has a ton of content that's been indexed, right, in search, and they derive a lot of algorithmic search traffic, or Dig has a ton of links in from tech bloggers and other people to stories that are on Dig, and that's part of the secret sauce of what they do. So that's kind of one model, is an SEO kind of model. A second model is a viral model, which I think is, I wish I could tell you the number of times that someone comes in to present and they say, we haven't turned on our viral features yet, but when we do, we're going to see the hockey stick. Like, that's sort of like the classic, like, don't do that if you're pitching the venture capitalists on your business, because it's like, look, it's either sort of, certain businesses have more, certain models have more viral potential than others, right? I mean, so an example, products or businesses that, fundamentally there's you derive value from getting other people involved with the product, right? And that's sort of the most obvious driver. And there's metrics you can specifically look at, some people call it a virality coefficient, but you look at the number of new users who are added by each existing user, right? And so we'll literally look at, if a site, you want a virality coefficient higher than 1, right? So each person who comes on is bringing on more than one new person. Ideally, you have a virality coefficient that's more like 1.3, 1.4, or even up to 2. But and ideally, you also can track beyond just what's happening from the first new person who's been brought in, but also the person who that person refers, because that's sort of what really gets the viral kind of engine going. So that's a second sort of path. And what you find often is that products that are highly engaging and highly addictive are not always, or many times are not viral, actually. And sometimes the products that are very viral, they're sort of like, people make a lot of fun about the, what's happening on Facebook and the viral social applications, but products that like require the opposable thumb oftentimes don't spread as easily because they're just not as simple and social, and so that's a second model, is the viral model, which I think there are people who are quite smart about how you engineer that. And then I think there's a third model, which is more of an arbitrage model, which is when you're talking about paying for clicks, you have to believe that fundamentally when you acquire users, that, the value you can get out of those users is greater than what you pay. So either you're like a lead sort of, you're generating automotive leads and you're paying, $1 and making $2 each time, the number's a little bit different than that, but that idea. Or when you get a user, your product is so addictive that they're going to stay around long enough and turn enough pages that it makes sense for you. So that's so I think that high level, I'd say that those are the three models, for driving traffic. In terms of specific paid sources and which ones to go after, I actually would probably defer to other people who may have better input on the trade-offs among those.
I think that what the second thing that you were talking about with looking at maybe social media and the viral component, I do believe that there is an opportunity for both of those types of products that you were talking about. I think there are social products that lend themselves really well and really sort of effectively to social networking and social media. There are the things that people just pick up on and they send them to 25 of their friends without even thinking about it. Then there are other products, the things that, like you said, you need opposable thumbs to use that are not as sexy and not as exciting, but that people do buy. And I think in that instance, you can still promote it through social networking. You just have to get really creative. You have to have a hook. You have to have some reason for people to care. There's a lot of good examples out there, and people are doing it, all the time online. People are forwarding ads, that are created by companies like Dove that are only available online, that really are, that the only aspect to the advertisement at all is the viral aspect of it. And, they're talking about selling, soap or shampoo or something like that. It's not, It's not the most exciting product in the entire world, but why are millions and millions of people forwarding it to their friends? Because it's compelling and it has a hook. So, I think there is an opportunity. Obviously, every small business doesn't have the budget that Dove has, but they do a lot of times have a lot of creativity. So I would say that, with those two product segments, there is an opportunity online for both. You just have to go at it a little bit differently. And then with regards to, just the paid advertising, to answer your question there, my philosophy with the internet is we have never had the ability to target advertising as effectively as we do now. That's the key. So you want to get as targeted as you possibly can, both by which site you're advertising on or which search engine you're advertising on, which keywords you're using, what your creative is, what your call to action is. It's all about the long tail, so you don't want to go after general keywords. They're not effective if you're paying for them. For optimization, if it's a long-term strategy, it might make sense for you. But long-tail keywords are extremely effective, and just making sure that you're connecting the dots between
info on where people are coming from, what they're converting into, and we can measure it, and having a good idea of our CPA, we can budget against that. What's been following up on that for us once we established that channel, mobile marketing was another big channel for us. It had the inventory is just cheaper right now than it is on the PC, so we're just able to pay less, and our cost per acquisition was a lot lower through mobile channels like AdMob and JumpTap and Medio and these other guys who are selling WAP kind of stuff. Sorry, AdMob, JumpTap, Medio. We market our own services through our. I'm actually in a position where I have to buy my own inventory and optimize against that, just like I do, Google Mobile. So
one other just comment on this: the definition of the marketing lead, the lead marketing executive for most of these startups has changed, I think, dramatically from what it would have looked like 10 years ago. So the person who sends in the resume with the classic marketing background and building brands and is oftentimes is less valued than someone who's really quantitative and analytical and understands tracking and search engine marketing and search engine optimization and sort of has been in the weeds around that. Because that's really, if you are going to be actually spending money on marketing, it's going to be much more generally in that kind of direction.
We're seeing, I just want to add to what the panel is saying, it hasn't come up yet, began about a year ago, but we're seeing user-generated contests as another way of making money. Last year's Doritos Super Bowl ad was a contest, and I don't know what the size of the prize was, but they had an underground viral series of events that drove submissions, and the best idea was then professionally produced, and the winner got a pretty big paycheck. Nissan next quarter is rolling out a nationwide program to 1 million college seniors, undergraduate college seniors, and every submission gets $2,000 off the car, and the winner gets college, all their debt paid off. And Nissan's rolling that out. It's kind of, as we describe this space, it's kind of YouTube meets American Idol. There's a contest aspect to it. There's a car crash aspect to it, but they're really tapping into their user base for looking for creative ideas, and it's a really, from an ad perspective, it's a really low-cost way of getting a lot of great ideas from the very people that use your product. Coming out of Sydney, Australia, Super Virals has done really well with VB Beer down in Australia and Telstra and a few others, and they're doing the Nissan work here in North America.
So it was interesting during my time at Yahoo, there were a handful of marketing guys whose expertise was in buzz marketing, which a lot of those programs kind of, to me, just kind of fall into that buzz marketing sort of, where there would be, they're making a video where they're, it's user generated, create your own blog, that kind of stuff, and it was they spent a lot of money promoting that, right? And so, the only measurable metrics that they ended up with at the end of the day was how many people went to the content that they were using to sort of promote that component of it. So it was really tough for them to kind of go and then say, yeah, we got 100,000 entries. What does that mean for, I was in the mobile group, so we had 100,000 entries into a specific contest. It didn't relate to anything in terms of repeat usage, how we could sort of measure growing the business, any of that. So even though I think that's out there, it kind of falls into that. To me, it kind of falls into that buzz section of like go out and create a name for yourself around the product or something like that.
I'm thinking about American Idol now. It's on my mind. Did anyone see the show last night? Nobody saw it?
We all T-voted it. We're going to skip the commercials tonight.
God, there's one of the kids on there was just amazing. But all right, we won't talk about that. Yeah, that was incredible. Yeah, and if you have it on TiVo, watch it. It was like a moment.
I think there's a question here, and then we'll come here. Start here.
Yeah, actually, me and a friend of mine was also a grad student in physics, so I think about pitching some website in 2.0. And I have just two real quick general questions about this. So one is, so it looks like a lot of the growth has been driven by advertising revenue, but currently, I guess the internet revenue went maybe from 0% or so to I think currently 10% or so of the full revenue in advertising in like a decade or a decade and a half, right? So, but now it's making up a pretty big chunk of the full pie of advertising revenue. Does that mean that it's going to have to sort of just mathematically level out sometime soon, and that this growth that we've been seeing in the past decade cannot be supported in the future?
No, it doesn't. I mean, so the internet advertising is about 5 to 6% of total advertising budgets today, and about 15 to 20% of people's time consuming media is spent on the internet, and it's actually higher than that for people who are under 25, right? So there's still a really significant gap between basically percentage of ad budgets and percentage of media consumption. And that gap is going to close over time. And also, as Kelly was talking about earlier, the internet is fundamentally it's a much more effective vehicle for advertising than a lot of other forms of media. And so it actually makes sense that over time that marketers might even overweight towards that, relative to consumption rather than underweight. So I think that fundamentally online advertising, I don't see growth slowing down there. Over the next, at least in the foreseeable future, there's still a lot of headroom.
James, can I challenge that?
Sure.
Let's
mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, if this internet advertising is that targeted and Beacon was all the rage a few months ago, all the controversy, shall I say, the ads being served to me on Facebook really don't matter. I'm still getting Russian brides. All this stuff. Honestly, and
what does that say about you, Mark?
Yeah, what does it say about me? Because my profile says I'm married.
Sounds pretty targeted.
My profile says I'm married. Moderator in trouble.
Kelly fed me that line, by the way.
That was very good. No, seriously, I specifically watch what ads get served up, and it looks like ads are just being dumped. Ads do not appear to match. I take out Arctic Monkeys as music, and what have nothing fits the profile, and they claim it's targeted, but it doesn't appear to be targeted. It looks like ads are being dumped because they got inventory to move.
Right. So, I would
not a criticism. I just is it targeted?
It's early.
Yeah.
Right. It's early. I would. So, and I'm going to ask Kelly to actually back me up on this too, and give some comments. But I would say that so when I was at Yahoo, what was actually pretty amazing was the average effective CPM, right? So the average revenue we were drawing out of either 1,000 impressions or 1,000 page views was just much lower than you would think it would be, right? Because we were selling a small percentage of our inventory at premium rates, and in the vast majority of it was sort of remnant that was not being really effectively monetized. And that's the way it is for a very large percentage of the web, right? Where the advertisers are effectively giving up the inventory at low rates, and they're not actually targeting the right impressions to the right people yet, because it's early and there's a lot of complexity. There are a couple of different ways to build a meaningful ad business, right? So one model is, you can create an automotive site for automotive shoppers, and you could have 3 million uniques and 60 million page views and build a $50 million a year revenue business, because those customers are so saleable, right? That inventory is so saleable to automotive marketers that you can sell it at incredibly high CPMs. The other model on the other extreme is, have 30 to 50 million users and who are each generating a couple hundred, page views. You have billions of page views, but your average effective CPM is 50 cents. And that's the way a lot of, social networks and social media sites look today, where they have huge amounts of inventory but very, very low effective rates, right? So I think that the opportunity and the challenge for companies that have a ton of inventory over time is to bring more relevancy, more targeting, more value, to the ads. And so there's been a wave of there's targeting based on behavior or based on context, or based on demographics, or there's lots of different ways to target. But I think over time there will also be ways to target based on the interest that you've demonstrated and also who you're connected to. And I think the first steps at doing that for Facebook, I think there were some missteps there, but there's still a lot of opportunity. And fundamentally, folks are going to get that right, and there'll be a next wave of targeting that will be based in clever ways around sort of social information and social connections.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. I think that if you look at what Google's done with targeting their ads through Gmail based on keywords that they're finding within your email messages, that's the direction that I think it's heading. And I think that there are some people that are resistant to that, but I think most people are getting to a point where they want to see that level of targeting. If I'm typing an email message to my husband about an upcoming ski trip and I get an ad for, check out the, hotel deals, that's really a good user experience for me. So, I don't mind that ad. As far as I'm concerned, I'm right in the buying cycle. I've given I put the information onto the internet by emailing someone about it. All it's doing is grabbing a keyword and then offering me up an advertisement that is targeted. So I think that's a good user experience. I think another thing though that you brought up that I want to talk about is I think cost per thousand advertising is hopefully going away at some point. And I think that again, sometimes you get sick of talking about how well Google's doing things, but their stock's been down lately, so that can give us a little bit of happiness. But, Google has gone into all of these publishers' sites and said, you guys are completely, unable to sell your ad space because your CPMs are too high, you don't know what you're doing, your traditional advertising reps are out there trying to sell this new medium that's been around now for 15 years. I mean, it's not that new anymore. So if you guys can't figure it out, we'll go ahead and we'll sell it for you. And they sell it to people like me who get to bid and decide how much we want to pay for it. And that's the CPC model, which we're also used to now because of AdWords and because of all the different search engines that we're using now. So, I think that advertising is moving in that direction too. And the beautiful thing there is that you have all these targeting capabilities that you never had in the past. I used to run advertisements on the Chicago Tribune's website at a $30 CPM that was run of the real estate site. Now, through Google, I can choose which page I want to be on, what time of day I want to be there, what my call to action is going to be. I can choose every type of targeting option that I'm choosing for my AdWords campaign, and I set the cost. So if I don't want to pay more than $2 a click, I won't. And by the way, all of those impressions are now free. So for $500 a month, I can have a much more effective and much more targeted campaign on the ChicagoTribune.com than I had last month for $5,000 a month. It's just that's where this whole thing is going. And I think that, these publishers are still scurrying around trying to figure out an ad model, and they just can't sell the inventory. And that's why 90% of the time when you go to a targeted section of Yahoo, you still see house ads because they have all of that inventory that they're just not able to sell. And yeah, they can certainly sell some premium, real estate there for a premium CPM, but it's such a small percentage that they're going to have to look at other options. And the advertisers are demanding that at this point. They're getting more savvy.
But I got lots and lots of questions coming up over here. You had your hand up for quite some time, and then we worked through these others. Your question was?
Yes, it was in terms of personalized, advertising, targeting. But I would like to know what you think the future is going to be on social advertising, social search engines, and when are people going to demand a line between their privacy? What's your point on how much they are willing to share their information, for the benefit of having a very targeted ad?
So I got the second part of your question. The first part of your question was about social search engines specifically, or?
And social advertising. How is that part of it? How do you see that in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. There's a lot to figure out. It's super early, and it's this interesting mix where on the one hand there's a lot of potential, and it's also very delicate, right? And so I think that, and this is an area obviously that Facebook is thinking a lot about and working, and doing a lot of work in. So it makes sense that there are certain things that happen in the offline world that would make sense to translate to the online world that can make advertising more effective. So the fact that if I watch Andy Roddick play tennis and he has Visa or American Express on his shirt, and I see that 30 times as he's serving, maybe I'm somehow marginally more likely to get an American Express card because I think Andy Roddick is cool, So there's that sort of idea around sort of the integration of brands and people we admire. So that's kind of and sort of social influence. I think there's something around that. I think there's something around this idea around the fact that I'm much more likely to be interested in let's say discovering new music or a book if I know that my friends are also interested in it or have responded to that. In the offline world, we get a lot of our information about products that we buy, cars and hotels, and from people we're connected to. So I think fundamentally there are certain powerful behaviors around how we discover and buy things in the offline world that will be translated online. And the challenge is how to do that in a way that doesn't make people feel like their privacy is violated or they're like hawking stuff to their friends in a way they didn't want to, right? And there's little, delicate things. I mean, just a little example. My wife has been wigging out recently because she has a friend who is on Facebook and has been uploading lots of pictures of herself and all of her friends, including my wife. And so there's all these pictures of my wife that now show up on my wife's Facebook profile that she doesn't really want on her profile, And so she's having to effectively sort of, because she's tagged in all these pictures, So there's lots of stuff like that around privacy and interconnections that are nuances to navigate and aren't simple.
And I got this gentleman's been waiting a long time, and we'll pick up these other questions as well. Please.
I'm curious, what's the future of Google in this space? Are they the new Microsoft?
That's a Ted question.
From our perspective, being a competitor in the advertising and search space, peripherally in the search space, yeah, I mean they're big. I mean, this 300-pound gorilla. I can't tell you. No, I can tell you. Every person I've ever interviewed or been interviewed by has said, "What about Google?" Right? And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're huge. I mean, they can move and make a move on anything at this point. And, it's interesting to see the moves they are making, at least from a mobile perspective. They're just skipping everything to do with content and going straight to the platform. So what do you think? Are they going to be the Microsoft? Well, it's, if they can build it or not, right? It's like that could be it. Do I think it is going to be? No, but they're making that play. So
we did want to. I have a Microsoft Yahoo question here coming up. Did everybody see that announcement? I think it was Monday, but Microsoft introduced some new ad technology that tracks the 3 or 4 clicks before you make a purchase or a conversion point. Is that going to make a difference? Kelly?
I think it's interesting. I think that stuff like that is going to make a difference for people like me and maybe for people like us that are that interested in it. I think, most of my clients are still trying to figure out how to look at a Google Analytics report. They're not there just yet, but they're hungry for the data. And I think, Microsoft needs to do whatever they possibly can right now to try to play catch up because they're so far behind Google in the search space.
Got it. Mika, you had a question, and then
Mention the investment perspective on Google.
Long or short?
If I truly knew the answer, I would have flown in here on my private jet, which would be parked right outside here, and I would have been buying or selling or shorting or going long.
No, not
Yep.
investing in them.
Yeah.
What do you do for your startups?
How do I think of Google in the context of our startups? Is that what you're saying? So, I mean, Google has done phenomenally well around search and advertising, right, which have been two the most exciting areas of the web, right, and of consumer technology over the last decade. So they've done an incredible job there and have made less of an impact in other areas they've gone into. So one thing I would just say is that if a company comes in and they're doing something that Google happens to be competing in, I'm not always concerned because there are many things that they're involved with that just aren't a focus and they're not excelling at. Just one other thing about Google is just reminded me that there's a guy named David Cowan who works at Bessemer, who's a very prolific venture capitalist. He has this great thing on the Bessemer website. It's called their anti-portfolio, and you should check either before or after you go in to pitch a venture capitalist, you should check out this area because it'll make you realize that whatever the outcome of the meeting, it matters, but it doesn't totally matter. So he was very good friends with a woman who was here at Stanford, who had a house right near the Stanford campus, and she was renting her garage, in the late 90s, to these two guys, Sergey and Larry. And David Cowan on the website describes how in his anti-portfolio, his friend kept saying, I have these two guys in my garage. Their names are Sergey and Larry. They're building a search engine. They're great. And he was literally, how can I find the way to get out of your house without going through your garage? Because the last thing I want to do is meet these guys. Anyway, so literally, just amazing. He said in the single biggest moment in Bessemer Ventures history, he literally figured out the way to get, he had to go through the garage, but he went out the back door or something, so he didn't have to see these guys. So I just say, in my job, I end up meeting with 300 companies a year, and I get to invest in 2. And it's, there's some analytics, there's some intuition, but it's hard, and we miss a lot of things that are great. And so I would just, not to, be too self-deprecating about that, but I would say that the interesting story about Google is lots of people who looked at it very early on saw all the reasons why it wasn't interesting and why you wouldn't want to compete with all the guys who were in search, right? And so if you fast forward, I don't think you cannot compete with Google because there's still ways to beat them, especially in certain parts of their business.
Mika, you had a question?
So what do you think about monetizing on the user-generated content itself? You can make a database and you can sell that for. Is there any example that you've seen, or do you think it's a way to monetize?
Are you saying monetizing on people's profiles, or I'm not sure what you mean?
The content people provide, translate materials, or Wikipedia. It's a non-profit, but if they want to, they monetize on the content itself. And I think there might be an example. It's been already, or it's coming.
Blogs are user-generated content. Are people going to pay more or less for ads on user-generated content sites versus a pure commercial site?
Well, I think where it's going is the example you gave was video, where the guy's holding the Molson
Product
bottle.
placement.
I think it's product placement. I mean, I believe that's where it's going. That companies will sponsor bloggers to speak frankly and openly about their products, and they can decide ahead of time if it's going to be positive, negative, or neutral. And there's that opportunity to start the conversation. And a lot of times controversy sells. So a lot of times, just getting people to talk about your product and starting that dialogue is really the first step towards, monetizing on that user-generated content. You just want, that viral impact. You want people to engage with your brand in any way possible. And people are much more likely to do that in the user-generated content space.
The other side of that, though, is there's actually a huge amount of premium content from big media companies is still just sort of massively under monetized. And there's actually a user dynamic which is not user contributed content, but user uploaded content or user syndicated content, right? So if you go on YouTube and you look at what people are actually watching on YouTube, there's certainly a lot of views around like the person who puts the Coke and the Mentos in the Coke can and it blows up and that gets 1 million views, or like they do with like 100 T-shirts, right? Look at me with 100 T-shirts and
the iPhone and the blender. Did you see that one?
all of those. Yeah. So this is how I spend all my time on that. And so anyway, so when I'm not watching Howard Stern or American Idol, or but there's actually a huge amount of views against CSI from CBS or High School Musical from Disney. And what it is it's not syndicated content by Disney or CBS. It's actually content that users are watching and they're uploading clips and they're spreading it around. And so I think a very interesting trend is going to be that as opposed to Viacom saying to YouTube, take my content down, the smart thing for Viacom to say is keep my content up, but if you want to keep it up, give me promotion and let me, share in the ad revenue around that. So I think a big trend is going to be beyond, on the other side of user-generated content is going to be user-syndicated or user-uploaded content. That's premium content from big media companies, and media companies actually starting to embrace that. Yeah. That's going to be a very interesting trend.
Here and then here.
Yes, I'm Mitchell. I have 2 questions. One is I was wondering your thoughts on affiliate and multi-level marketing approaches as opposed to the CPC model or pay for sales. And the second is, what's your experience so far with integrated marketing with traditional firms, how they work with the internet channel and perhaps do direct mail to them or coordinate promotions, events, this kind of thing? Do any of them understand it? Do you like any of them better than others? Maybe that question is more directed towards Kelly. I'm not sure.
Let's start with Kelly.
Well, the second question, I think that's where this needs to go, and I think that traditional ad agencies still have a place within companies' advertising and marketing strategic plans, but they have to come to the table and work with the interactive marketing, which that's what my company specializes in. I don't try to be the guy that goes in the room and comes out with a big idea and the print campaign and the television ad and the radio spots. That's not my gig. I don't excel there. What I do well, though, is take that message and look at that media calendar and figure out how to incorporate that utilizing online channels. And I think that when these two come together is when they really provide the most value for a client. And unfortunately, a lot of traditional media agencies are not necessarily on board with that because they're either A, trying to do online themselves, or they're resistant to the fact that some of their dollars are going towards this new channel. But I think it is happening more and more, and our clients, we have everything, all across the board in terms of the relationships, and the most successful relationships are the ones where we're able to work with the traditional media company, the traditional media agency, and have an integrated campaign that truly has coverage in all of the different channels. Because we don't want our clients to stop advertising offline. We just want to make sure that what they're doing online is as effective as it can possibly be.
On the multi-level marketing stuff, so there's a bunch of folks who tried to take that model, to the web, kind of be sort of an Amway kind of, Herbalife kind of distribution model, to spread a product. There was All Advantage was like the famous one, right, where you got paid to get your friends to, when they were surfing, you got to share the ad revenue, and ultimately kind of like they got to this place where they were paying out so much that it just blew up. There's a company called Burn Lounge that was doing it around setting up music stores. It was kind of like iTunes meets Amway. That also went under. More recently, there was a company called Agloco that was trying to do that. It was actually the guy from All Advantage who tried to do it again. So I think that the history is sort of littered with people who've tried to apply multi-level marketing to the web and not very successfully. That's not necessarily predictive of what will happen in the future, but as an investor, I'm sort of gun-shy around that. It's also not a model that I intimately understand. So I think you have to really, really know what you're getting into before doing that. It could work, but you have to be cautious.
Just really quick, just one little thing. I have a client actually in Chicago who does multi-level marketing in a consultant fashion. So, and their internet advertising has been focused on product up until now. The main goal has always been just to sell product, not to recruit. And actually this year they have changed that a little bit, and they're going to start doing some testing on the recruiting side. So how to find women that are interested in these opportunities to, sort of join this network and begin these parties and shows and selling their products. So next year I can let you know how that goes.
Next question here.
Yes, I was wondering where podcasting fits into all this. Most of what you're talking about apply and so how. And where's all that?
Start with Ted. You got any views on that? Sorry, I mean, to keep you off guard.
No, I mean, I just see it as a content source. It's like a blog. I mean, one thing it's something that's just kind of occurring to me. It's, a lot of the questions about content and then value of inventory. It's that, and you see this a lot with podcasts and blogs. There's just a lot of bad content out there, and it's just not going to be worth anything.
Let me just clarify. The reason I bring this up is because podcasts are sort of, you can enjoy or benefit from the podcast without having to go to the website. Just get an RSS or whatever the equivalent is, and so there's not the opportunity to deliver an ad in the way that we're talking about here.
I see two kinds of podcasts. There's audio podcasts and video podcasts, right? And then there's two kinds of sort of distribution models. There's a model where people are actually paying for content, where it would be like, for example, downloading, NBC content, right, or NPR. There's, some of that stuff that people actually are paying for a couple bucks for the content. And then there's actually an ad-supported model. And there is the ad-supported downloadable media market is between a $50 and $100 million market total in terms of revenue across the industry today.
And how's that market funded today?
It's very, very small. I mean, so there are a couple of companies that are focused on being sort of like ad networks around downloadable media, or providing just the ad serving into downloadable media. There's a company called Kiptronic. There's another company called Podbridge that I think they relaunched with a different brand. And what they've actually gone towards, though, is providing ad serving and ad networks for both downloadable media and also streaming. Because fundamentally, some people are willing to download media, but a lot of people actually just still want, they want to stream it. They want to check it out still on the web. And so it's sort of, I guess I'd say podcasts and downloadable media is sort of one part of a bigger equation around how people consume media. And I think it's sort of one distribution source. The advertising against it today is quite small.
Question back here and then up here.
So, how do you look at the CPA model of advertising and traction in the next few years? And at this point in time, what are the technological barriers or other barriers for that advertising model?
The CPM model?
CPA.
Oh, the CPA model. I think the CPA model is growing, and I think it's catching on more and more. I think it's a good opportunity when it fits, and I think that there's going to be more CPA opportunities in the future. CPC, a few years ago was the only place you could do CPC was with search, and now it's available in a lot of other channels. So I think that's definitely coming.
You've got time for two more questions. I'll take yours and then one more after this one. Yours, and then we're going to do a quick drive-by smorgasbord here. So your question first.
This is more for you, Ted. We're making an SMS 2.0 business, and we're trying to get an idea of how much scale we need. Can you give me an idea of what the CPM range is for SMS?
So it depends. So we have two classes of inventory, and so it goes anywhere from $10 to $40. So probably our average is probably around $30, $35 right now. So, but that's a lot of effort to go in to sort of get that. So it's depending on the size of the company. Basically what people are looking for is more in the range of probably like around 20 right now.
Great. Anything to add, Kelly, James? Any question here?
Well, the question is more about international. I have been living here for 2 years. One from Mexico, and it's incredible the difference between the market, the internet market in the USA and Mexico, because we still don't buy almost anything by internet. And here you can be, I think you can be 1 week inside your house and buy everything that you need by internet. You need to go out. So what do you think is going to happen in the international market, like Latin America? Like I think Europe can be very advanced too, but I know like Latin America or Asia. What do you know about those markets? What's the tendency that they have around with them? Do you have some?
I think this is an area where mobile really kind of comes into play. Penetration of cell phones within international markets is way higher than it is here in the U.S., and the U.S. is really high. So in most places, that's going to be the first way that anybody actually touches the internet is going to be through a mobile phone, especially in any kind of developing country. So you can already look at places like South America, Central America, where their level of content that you can get on your handset is as good or better than anything you can get on the internet here. So, you can get highlights of soccer games and that kind of stuff, telenovelas and, that kind of, specifically like Brazil is a great example where you can get really intense, good quality mobile content. And, they're going to develop their networks faster, speeds are going to get better. And they're more focused on, taking it with you than having a PC experience.
Well, I'd like to answer that question, actually. There's two examples. About a year ago, there was a Facebook knockoff in China. Somebody sent me the link. You looked it up. It was a Facebook UI in Chinese. And somebody we've seen this for 10 years, the internet generation. These North American-based internet companies that don't go abroad quickly find competition. eBay's their French acquisition, eBay Europe was actually an acquisition they did. Somebody built a knockoff business. Seattle's Coffee in London was a Starbucks acquisition. You see this all the time. If these companies don't get international fast enough, competition that looks just like them crops up. These are knockoff businesses. I think Facebook learned its lesson, and they enrolled their users to translate a Spanish language product. And it's been in the news the last couple of months. 2 weeks ago, I was at GSM World in Barcelona. I fired up my phone, and I got Facebook Mobile, and it saw me in Barcelona and served me up a Spanish language Facebook UI. Problem is I don't speak Spanish very well, so I had to turn it off. But it was very interesting. A year ago, they got a knockoff product that looked just like them. This year, they enrolled their user base to actually do translation for a Spanish language product. We're going to take one question, then I'll let the panel just stay down here for 5 more minutes for informal Q&A if anyone wants to talk. Last question.
Ad revenue models early in a venture, or go purely for distribution and growth and figure that out later?
So I'll give you my take on that. So I think that early on, I think it depends a little bit on what your model is, But I think there's a couple of different. My general bias would be to not focus on it early on, but I'm going to qualify that with it depends on what your model is. So I think there are some models that are where what you're trying to prove is basically that your product is like addictive and people are going to love it. I think there's some models where you're trying to prove that your product is sort of spread worthy and sort of viral and people are going to spread it. And there's some models where you're trying to prove you have a great economic engine, And it sort of depends on what you think what's the greatest potential in terms of like the sort of the mousetrap that you're going to build. I think if you assume that you can build a model that's either addictive or viral, then I don't think that you should focus on monetization super early. I think you should focus on the other things. I think especially early on, the key thing is very early is, can you even get 5,000 people, let's say, who really love your product and sort of take their feedback and be intimate with them and tune your product before you even try to scale it to, 100,000 people? Because you have 100,000 people using your product and they don't love it, it's kind of hard to actually backtrack, and it's hard to tune at scale. It's a lot easier to tune when you've got things much more under control. So my general thing would be it depends on your model. If it's a viral model or an addictive model, I would focus less on monetization. And in general, early, I would focus more on getting a small group of people who totally love your product and are crazy about it, and will start to spread it on your behalf.
If I could extrapolate from that, one of the things I heard was really focus on the product and nail the user experience, right? That's number one. How we're kind of the only player in the space right now, and there's been a bunch of SMS search engine kind of plays. We've just done a better job, right? In our first year there was no monetization. We barely, distribution kind of came at the tail end of our first year, where we even sort of tried to make attempts on it. It's really just focused on building a good product. And, having that focus really helped later down the road, where we could rest on that and be like, look, it works.
I would just qualify that, though, with, you are in business to make money, and if ad revenue is going to be a big stream of your revenue, I think it's an important strategy to be thinking about. I definitely wouldn't want to wait too long to implement something where you get to a point that your users are used to not being advertised to. And I think I love that Facebook doesn't have ads all over it the way that their competitors do, but I do think that Facebook now has to figure out the way to monetize on that, and I think they will. It's a good problem to have. So, it's not, I'm kind of contradicting myself with that example, but, not everyone is Facebook. And I think that, a lot of web businesses do need to incorporate an advertising model, and that's a big part of of how they're going to be successful. So it's definitely something to think about. If you have ideas of sponsors or people that would be willing to advertise, I don't know that I would walk away from that just so that you can make sure that the product is right. I tend to kind of err on the other side, which is go after whatever marketing dollars or advertising dollars are available to ensure that you build it the right way for those advertisers.
I'd like to just, we're going to close now, and the panel will be available for questions down here, but Ted learned at 9:30 this morning that he was coming today. We now know that James has to go back to Greylock and watch YouTube videos of people wearing 100 T-shirts. And Kelly, thanks for coming all the way from Chicago. And lastly, Justin, for helping us organize this from a Sanford perspective. So you can join us.